Samuel Turner, a dignified elderly gentleman with a past as rich as the legacy he built, shuffled along the bustling terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport that crisp autumn morning. Clad in a worn brown jacket and clutching a time-worn leather satchel, Samuel's weathered face told a story of decades spent overcoming relentless adversity. His frail frame, a result of both age and the many hardships life had thrown his way, moved with a careful determination despite the stiffness in his joints. As he approached the crowded boarding area, Samuel's measured steps resonated with an inner strength that belied the physical toll of arthritis and a lifetime spent in constant vigilance. He was the man who had risen from nothing to create an airline empire that spanned the nation, yet today he traveled incognito as a humble passenger in seat 23B on a plain Boeing 737, his mission not one of luxury, but of reflection and silent resistance. In the midst of the sea of hurried travelers, Samuel remained quietly observant, his keen eyes taking in every dismissive glance and every whispered judgment. The airport's stale aroma of reheated coffee and oversweetened pretzels, mixed with the underlying tension of frequent flight delays, announced in a monotonous tone over the intercom. While businessmen in sharp suits barked into their phones and families struggled to keep pace with their energetic children, Samuel was seen as just another unremarkable elderly black man dressed in economy attire. His presence, however, carried an unseen weight, one laden with memories of past struggles and the quiet intensity of those who have endured a lifetime of prejudice. The moment that would alter the course of his day, and perhaps his destiny, occurred unexpectedly near the check-in counter. As Samuel advanced in the line, a young white couple near him engaged in a petty squabble over who would carry their restless toddler, their voices tinged with an entitlement that seemed all too natural in that environment. Behind him, a middle-aged woman in a vibrant red scarf mumbled discontentedly about the slow pace of the line. Samuel listened intently, his heart aching with the silent recognition of these everyday conflicts. Yet, he remained composed and gracious in the face of apparent snubs. It was at the counter that Samuel encountered Karen Pierce, the flight attendant whose icy demeanor would spark a flame of righteous retribution deep within him. Karen, with her tall, lean frame and neatly pulled-back blonde hair, wore the immaculate navy uniform of Horizon Airlines with an air of superiority. Her pale, almost porcelain skin and sharply defined features, accentuated by a bold swipe of crimson lipstick, betrayed a coldness that went far beyond the demands of her job. When Samuel, with his trembling hands and slightly faded boarding pass, extended his documents, Karen's eyes narrowed with an unmistakable disdain. Without offering a kind word or even the minimal courtesy that many would expect, she snapped, "Ticket and ID, let's go." Her tone left no room for negotiation, her impatience manifesting in a condescending huff as she scanned his documents with a brisk, dismissive air. As the scanner's harsh beep sounded and Karen thrust the papers back at him, Samuel's expression remained calm, though his heart pounded with the weight of a lifetime of being undervalued. The cruel words that followed from her lips, delivered in a thick southern drawl, cut sharper than any physical blow. "Economy's in the back. Don't clog up my line," she muttered with venom, sealing Samuel's status in her eyes as a poor, insignificant old man unworthy of respect. Around him, some passengers exchanged furtive glances, while others pretended not to notice the injustice unfolding before their eyes. In that moment, every whispered judgment and every sneer of disregard coalesced into a poignant reminder of the unyielding racism that had dogged Samuel's steps since his youth. Despite the sting of humiliation, Samuel maintained his composure and continued his journey toward the jet bridge with measured resolve. His cane tapped steadily on the polished floor, marking each deliberate step toward the sanctuary of the waiting plane. Along the way, he encountered other travelers whose struggles echoed his own in subtle, silent ways. One such interaction involved a Latina woman named Sofia Morales, who wrestled with an obstinate carry-on suitcase that refused to fit into the overhead compartment. Samuel, with his innate sense of empathy and generosity, stepped forward to help her guide the recalcitrant bag into its place. Sophia's eyes softened with gratitude as she thanked him in a gentle tone, a brief moment of shared humanity amidst the chaos of air travel. Yet even this small act of kindness did not escape Karen's critical gaze. Stationed near the first-class cabin, she observed with increasing irritation the delicate balance of compassion and dignity Samuel embodied. Her reaction was immediate, a frown that deepened into a sneer as she muttered to herself about how Samuel, a member of a group she regarded as inferior, was holding up everything. Her quiet vitriol, uttered in private yet meant to be felt by anyone who cared to listen, only heightened the palpable divide between the haves and have-nots, between those who wielded power and those who were routinely diminished. It was in the echo of Karen's words that Samuel felt an old, familiar spark rekindling, a spark that had lain dormant for far too long. As he continued down the narrow jet bridge, the atmosphere transforming from the public chaos of the terminal to the enclosed intensity of the boarding passage, his thoughts churned with reflections of past injustices. Every dismissive glance, every whispered epithet had accumulated over the years, each one a small, persistent wound that he had learned to hide behind quiet dignity. Now, however, the humiliation inflicted by Karen Pierce would be the catalyst that set him on an irrevocable path toward retribution. The jet bridge itself was a narrow metallic tunnel that carried the stench of jet fuel and the tangible pressure of impending departure. Samuel's frail form moved slowly amidst the crowd, guided by memories of earlier battles fought against a system that continually underestimated his worth. Just as he reached a section of the bridge where the floor was slick from a spill, disaster struck. His worn shoe caught on a treacherous patch of spilled coffee, sending his cane skittering uncontrollably across the cold surface. In that precarious moment, his body teetered on the brink of collapse, and his instinctive reflexes momentarily faltered. It was then that Karen's hand, cold and unyielding, clamped around his arm with a force that belied her delicate appearance. "Move it, old man, you're holding up my flight," she barked imperiously, her voice carrying the chilly edge of contempt. With a dismissive tug that forced him 20 feet further down the bridge, Karen reduced Samuel not to a revered founder, but to a pitiful figure struggling against the current of her disdain. For a brief, shattering moment, the entire terminal felt the gravity of his vulnerability, the collective gasps of nearby passengers punctuating the cruelty of that encounter. Despite his internal turmoil and the burning need for dignity, Samuel remained silent, swallowing the shame and pain as he forced his weary body to continue forward. Within Samuel's heart, however, the humiliation sown that day and the countless similar wounds of a lifetime of discrimination began to coalesce into a singular, relentless resolve. He would not allow his identity, a culmination of years of struggle, loss, and hard-won victories, to be reduced by a single act of cruelty. Instead, he envisioned a sweeping, decisive response that would not only restore his own dignity, but would also expose the deep-seated injustices that so many had come to accept as inevitable. In that moment, as the hum of the airplane engines vibrated beneath him and the cold metal of the jet bridge pressed against his hands, Samuel Turner silently vowed that he would confront the venom of prejudice head-on. His retribution would be as grand and unmistakable as the empire he had built, a reclaiming of honor that would leave even his most callous adversaries trembling in its wake. Today, dear listener, as you reflect on Samuel's journey, a tale of quiet suffering transformed into a powerful declaration of defiance, remember that every slight and every moment of injustice, no matter how small, has the potential to ignite a spark of change. For Samuel Turner, the path to redemption would involve more than just a personal vindication. It was a mission to challenge a societal structure that had long relegated people like him to the margins. His story is one of hope, resilience, and an unyielding pursuit of justice that resonates with anyone who has ever felt diminished by the world around them. Through every trial he has faced, Samuel's spirit has not broken, it has only grown stronger. fortified by the many battles fought in silence. And as his tale unfolds, it reminds us all that true strength is born not from the absence of suffering, but from the courage to rise again in the face of overwhelming odds. In this reimagined narrative, the clash between Samuel Turner and Karen Pierce is not just a personal vendetta, but a reflection of a larger struggle, a battle between compassion and cruelty, between the dignity of the overlooked and the arrogance of those who would let prejudice dictate their actions. The road ahead promises not only a confrontation, but a sweeping, cathartic moment of retribution that will leave onlookers both aghast and inspired by its audacity. This is a story that appeals to the empathetic soul, a story that reminds us that even when the world seems cold and indifferent, justice has a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected forms. Samuel Turner continued his slow, measured journey along the jet bridge as his cane dangled uselessly from his left hand, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His battered satchel slipped from his shoulder, thudding on the cold metal floor while precious papers scattered like autumn leaves in a harsh wind. Among the fallen documents was an old Polaroid, its edges yellowed with time, capturing a moment of youthful pride when Samuel stood tall beside two well-dressed men under the faint glow of the Horizon Airlines logo. Karen Pierce, with her unwavering sneer, barely spared the photo a glance before kicking it aside with the toe of her pristine shoe, her voice dripping with disdain as she muttered, "Clumsy fool, making a mess for me to clean up." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as onlookers registered the cruelty of her actions, some too shocked to move, while others exchanged looks of quiet outrage. In the midst of the commotion, Sofia Morales, the compassionate Latina mother whom Samuel had helped earlier, stepped forward with a fierce determination in her eyes. "Hey, stop that!" she cried out, her voice trembling with anger and sorrow as she pleaded for mercy. But Karen, lost in her own world of superiority, merely shoved Samuel harder, sending him stumbling into a cold, unforgiving wall. Samuel's shoulder struck the metal with a dull thump, and the pain radiated in sharp, red marks where Karen's grip had been merciless. Despite the humiliation and the physical ache, Samuel's eyes burned with a quiet resolve as he steadied himself against the wall, his battered body determined to keep moving, even under the crushing weight of injustice. Passengers around them could no longer ignore the incident. A teenage girl in a hoodie fumbled with her phone, hesitating before recording what she knew was a moment of profound injustice, while a rugged man in a cowboy jersey clenched his fists in silent outrage. Elderly couples murmured disapprovals and exchanged knowing glances that spoke of lives worn down by a society too accustomed to injustice. Meanwhile, Karen's voice rang out coldly as she dismissed Sophia's objections with a patronizing, "Mind your business, lady," as she barked orders about keeping to the schedule and not delaying her precious flight any further. Samuel's cane lay abandoned a few feet away, its surface scratched from the fall as he slowly retrieved it with trembling hands. The pain in his arm pulsed with every heartbeat, yet his gaze, steady and unyielding, locked on Karen for a brief, charged moment before he turned his focus to gathering the scattered remnants of his past. Despite the chaos and the relentless cruelty, Samuel's spirit remained unbroken. He tucked the half-hidden Polaroid back into his satchel, a silent reminder of the empire he had built from scratch, and continued onward toward the plane. Each step was a testament to his quiet resilience and a burning desire for retribution. As he limped toward his seat in the economy section, his mind already churned with thoughts of justice, his inner determination growing with every hostile glance thrown his way. Karen Pierce, strutting ahead in her immaculate uniform and blinded by a false sense of superiority, had no idea that her callous actions that day would ignite an inferno of retaliation. Samuel Turner vowed silently that the storm of payback was coming, a reckoning so grand it would leave even the most hardened hearts in awe. Samuel Turner sat quietly in seat 23B as the atmosphere in the economy cabin grew thicker with tension and indignation. Karen Pierce, still reveling in her earlier triumphs over him, strode down the aisle with an air of imperious entitlement. When Tom Hargrove attempted to hand Samuel his pre-ordered meal, Karen snatched the tray from Tom's hands with such force that it startled everyone nearby. She barked, "Rules are rules. He doesn't get specials just because you feel sorry for him." Her voice carried just enough to draw the attention of several passengers who exchanged disapproving looks, and the moment resonated like a sharp slap across the souls of all who witnessed it. The tray was carelessly shoved back onto the cart, and Samuel could only watch as his dignity was further trampled underfoot. His stomach churned with a relentless hunger, a hunger that went beyond the physical pangs and spoke to decades of being treated as if he were invisible. The red marks from her earlier assault still pulsed on his arm, each throb a reminder of Karen's cruelty. He maintained his composure even as he sat, his eyes following her every move as she served the rows ahead with a cold detachment. The look on his face was one of quiet resignation, yet deep inside, Samuel nurtured a fierce determination, a determination born of lifelong struggle and the uncompromising necessity for justice. Nearby, a young redhead with freckles leaned over to a friend and murmured, "She has no right treating him like that. What's her problem?" Tom, still seething with silent anger, simply shook his head and replied, "Some people just like kicking others when they can." The cabin was filled with a palpable mix of pity and frustration as passengers watched Samuel, a man who had built Horizon Airlines from nothing, enduring this latest abuse with a stoic grace that only deepened their sympathy. As the plane ascended into the vast Texas sky and the steady roar of the engines filled the space, Samuel's mind turned over every slight, every jab that had been thrown his way. Memories of a hard childhood in a cramped Houston tenement mingled with the present injustice, and each recollection fueled a quiet, simmering resolve within him. He had endured far worse than the humiliation of a snatched tray and denied meal, and yet the wound was fresh and unfair. He recalled how Karen had dismissed the fact that he had paid for his meal online 2 days ago, her voice dripping with disdain as she retorted that her records showed nothing. When Samuel summoned the courage to speak up, his tone was calm yet edged with steel. "Miss Pierce?" he called out softly enough for nearby ears to catch his words. "Check again? I paid for that meal online. It is in your system." Heads turned, and even Karen paused, her icy smirk wavering as she flipped through her clipboard with a sudden urgency. Behind her, supportive murmurs began to rise among the passengers, including Tom, Sophia Morales, and even the observant redhead, who all subtly voiced their discontent through their eyes and whispers. In that moment, as the cold, unappetizing tray of meal was reluctantly returned to Samuel, a small but significant victory glimmered amid the cruelty. It was a humble act, a crack in the invincible armor of Karen Pierce's arrogance. And for Samuel Turner, it marked another step toward reclaiming his dignity and ensuring that the relentless tide of prejudice would soon be met with a force of monumental retribution. Samuel Turner sat in seat 23B, his frail frame sinking into the worn gray cushion while the cabin of the Boeing 737 buzzed with restless murmurs and low conversations. The earlier humiliations had piled on himself like the countless scars of a lifetime spent fighting against a system steeped in disdain. As the flight steadied after some turbulence over the New Mexico deserts, Samuel's stomach still ached with emptiness, and his spirit simmered with a rising storm of retribution. Moments earlier, a steaming cup of coffee had been set before him by Karen Pierce, the imperious flight attendant whose cruelty knew no bounds. In that fleeting moment, she had announced, "Black, please," her voice a calculated blend of condescension and authority as she poured the rich, dark liquid and handed him the cup. Her deliberate slowness seemed meant to intimidate him, and Samuel accepted the cup with a calm that belied the storm inside. As he took a careful sip, feeling the warming heat soothe his parched throat, Karen's mocking tones slipped into caution. "Careful now, wouldn't want you to spill," she said with a faint, patronizing curl of her lips. But in an instant, fate and her own recklessness converged. With a careless trip and a misplaced elbow, Karen knocked the cup from his grasp. The scalding coffee burst forth, splashing across Samuel's lap and searing through his thin pants. His skin flared with pain as red welts and blistering burns seared his thighs and forearm, a white-hot lance that left him gasping as he jerked upright. The tray clattered to the floor while his half-eaten meal scattered across his shoes, and in that moment of chaos, Karen's voice rang out with a mocking, "Oops, clumsy me." As if his suffering were mere entertainment, passengers gasped and murmured in horror. Tom Hargrove cursed under his breath as he scrambled for napkins, while Sophia Morales clutched her toddler tighter, her eyes filled with disbelief and sadness. A young redhead's granola bar slipped from her hand onto her lap as everyone around shared an unspoken outrage at Karen's callous behavior. Samuel's hand trembled as he pressed napkins to his burning skin, the pain starkly reminding him of the physical and emotional scars forced upon him all his life. Each blister and stain was a testament to a history of discrimination and degradation, a history that Karen meant to repeat with every action. But Samuel Turner was not a man to be broken by cruelty. Despite the burning agony and the humiliation of having his dignity trashed in front of an entire cabin, a cold fury began to build within him. His eyes, sharp and resolute, flashed with a fury that belied his frail body. He knew that Karen had not stumbled by accident. Her actions were deliberate, a brutal reminder that to her, he was less than nothing. As the plane shuddered through pockets of rough air at 35,000 feet over the stark New Mexico skies, his thoughts grew sharper, each jolt of turbulence intensifying his determination for revenge. The Boeing 737's metal frame groaned under the stress of the flight, and as the cabin lurched, Samuel's treasured wooden cane skidded away, clattering on the carpet. Struggling to regain balance, his left hand shot out and gripped the armrest of a nearby seat, eliciting a startled cry from a young woman across the aisle. The burns on his legs and forearm pulsed painfully, and blood from a fresh cut above his eyebrow mingled with the remnants of the scalding coffee. Yet, even as pain seared through his temple with each shudder of the aircraft, his mind locked onto every slight Karen had inflicted. Then, as if the universe had decided to compound his suffering, Karen Pierce stormed down the aisle like a hawk with eyes of ice. Her pristine navy blazer and carefully styled blonde bun remained immaculate despite the unfolding chaos. With the calculated step of someone who believed herself untouchable, she zeroed in on Samuel. "Sit down, you're a hazard," she barked in her thick southern drawl, her voice rising above the roar of the engines and the anxious whispers of passengers. Before Samuel could muster a response, she planted her hands on his shoulders and shoved him violently back into his seat. The force slammed his head against the window, the glass rattling with a sharp crack as a thin trickle of blood emerged above his eyebrow. Samuel grunted as his vision blurred momentarily from the pain, but the real agony lay not just in the physical harm inflicted, but in the humiliation of having his dignity stripped away in public. His body, battered by insults and abuse that went far beyond the pain of burns and cuts, trembled with restrained fury. Across the aisle, Tom Hargrove's jaw clenched, and Sophia Morales' eyes welled with tears as the young redhead gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Not all were willing to stand by silently. Jamal Carter, seated 2 rows ahead, pulled out his sleek smartphone and began recording the scene. His short dreads framed a face set in a determined frown, and his brown eyes narrowed as he captured Karen's violent shove and Samuel's pained wince. "This is going viral," Jamal said under his breath, louder than intended, enough for Karen to catch wind. With the malicious precision of a tyrant, Karen spun towards him, her sneer morphing into a snarl as she lunged forward. "No filming allowed," she snapped, swiping at his wrist and twisting it until he cried out in pain. The phone tumbled to the floor, clattering amid the whispers of discontent, and before anyone could protest, she scooped it up and shoved it into her blazer pocket with an air of triumphant authority. "That's confiscated," she declared imperiously, her tone as cold as the steel in her eyes. The cabin buzzed with whispered outrage as passengers exchanged looks that ranged from shock to simmering anger. Tom muttered through gritted teeth, "She's a bully with a badge," and even Sophia, clutching her toddler closer, whispered that someone had to stand up to such cruelty. Yet, as the captain's calm voice over the intercom announced that the worst of the turbulence was over, the immediate storm seemed to subside, leaving only the heavy, oppressive silence of unspoken rage. Samuel Turner sat with his blood-streaked face and burning skin, his mind racing amidst the physical agony. His cane lay forlorn by the window, just out of reach, as his thoughts turned darkly pragmatic. The relentless injustice and vicious arrogance of Karen Pierce had pushed him to a tipping point. He would not allow her cruelty to go unpunished. Though battered, he was a man who had built Horizon Airlines from a single plane and a dream, and in his 72 years he had endured countless hardships. Today, she had not only assaulted him physically, but had also struck at the very core of his dignity and self-worth. As he sat there, every fiber of his being pulsing with a blend of pain and wrath, Samuel's eyes caught sight of Jamal's earlier act of defiance. The recording, even if confiscated now, held the promise of exposing the injustice for all to see. In that silent, charged moment, a spark of alliance passed between Samuel and Jamal. A mutual understanding that the scales of power were about to be upended. Samuel's hand slipped into his jacket pocket, brushing against the cool surface of a burner phone he had kept hidden for emergencies. Its screen was dark now, but within its circuitry lay the power to reclaim his honor. He vowed that when the time was right, he would use that weapon to turn the tables on Karen Pierce. The cabin lights cast a pale glow over rows of passengers still whispering in disbelief, and even as the flight continued its smooth course over the Arizona night sky, a storm of retribution brewed within Samuel Turner. His body was weakened by the blows inflicted by Karen, but his resolve was as hard as the steel of the aircraft's frame. He silently calculated his next moves, every slight, every insult, transforming into fuel for the monumental retaliation he planned. In his mind, Karen's arrogance, her unyielding disdain, and her violent racist outbursts were not isolated incidents, but part of a system that he was determined to dismantle. And so, as the plane cruised steadily above vast, starlit landscapes, Samuel Turner sat quietly in his seat with a burning determination that would not be extinguished by pain or humiliation. He would gather evidence, rally those who saw the injustice, and one day, he would make sure that Karen Pierce paid dearly for every moment of degradation she had inflicted upon him and others. His battered body, marked by burns, cuts, and bruises, was not a sign of defeat, but a testament to a lifetime of resilience. In the silent comfort of that dim cabin, his mind whirled with the promise of a reckoning. A retribution so grand, so magnificently orchestrated, that it would leave even his most hardened oppressors in awe and fear. The seeds of revenge had been sown, and with every heartbeat Samuel Turner felt them grow stronger. Each droplet of blood, each wave of pain that coursed through him was a clarion call to justice, a call that would resonate far beyond the confines of that cramped airplane. And as the stars twinkled outside, indifferent to the human strife below, Samuel's spirit soared with the certainty that the day of his triumphant reclamation was coming. His was a battle fought not only for himself, but for every soul silenced by prejudice and every heart bruised by unthinking cruelty. It was a battle to restore dignity, to flip the script on those who thrived on the suffering of the weak, and to ensure that one day every public display of arrogance, like Karen Pierce's ruthless reign of terror, would be met with a response so overwhelming that the world would stand in stunned silence, saying, "Now, that is justice done." Samuel Turner sat in his seat 23B as the tension in the cabin grew thicker than the stale coffee scent in the air. Across the aisle, Tom Hargrove closed his laptop with a furrowed brow, his crisp white shirt now wrinkled by worry, while Sophia Morales gently rocked her sleeping toddler 2 rows ahead. Even the redhead beside Tom fidgeted with her empty granola wrapper, her freckles standing out on her pale face as she replayed Karen Pierce's merciless shove over and over in her mind. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and spilled coffee, remnants of the napkins Samuel had desperately used to dab his burns and wipe away his blood. Jamal Carter, 2 rows ahead, still rubbed his sore wrist where Karen had twisted it, his short dreads framing a face marred by frustration as he stared at Samuel with burning eyes. Jamal's eyes burned with anger when he realized the confiscated phone was now nothing more than shattered plastic clutched in Karen's smug hands. His voice, low but fierce, cut through the murmur of the cabin as he whispered, "That is bullshit. She cannot get away with this. I'll get that video to the news, I swear." Samuel managed a pained yet determined nod and a faint smile that barely masked his agony. Jamal quickly scribbled his number on a crumpled napkin, passing it to Sophia, who, with trembling fingers, handed it along to Samuel. The napkin was tucked beside the hidden burner phone in his jacket pocket, rekindling a slender hope in his heart amidst the overpowering humiliation. But Karen Pierce was not ready to let any rebellion rise. With a cold, calculating gaze, she emerged from the galley, her navy blazer immaculate and her blonde bun gleaming under the dim cabin lights. Her sharp blue eyes scanned the passengers before she slowly approached the first-class section, where a younger co-worker named Mike Tanner lounged. Karen's voice dropped to a sly, hushed tone as she confided in him, "I need a favor. That guy in economy, the one filming me, is causing trouble. I have his phone, but I need it gone." Mike, with a cocky grin, demanded, "What's in it for me?" Karen dangled a first-class voucher with gold trim, promising a next flight upgrade, front-row privileges, even free drinks if he disposed of the evidence. Mike accepted the deal with a laugh, taking the phone from her and striding casually through the aisle, the mocking sound of his voice trailing behind him as he muttered, "Shouldn't have caused trouble." In a heartbeat, Mike vanished into the galley and, hidden by the clatter of trays, smashed the phone against the counter. The pieces of evidence were tossed into a trash chute, and with a nonchalant wipe of his hands on his pants, he returned to first class, leaving Samuel and the rest of the cabin reeling with disbelief. Jamal's face fell in shock and rage as he muttered, "That bastard," he got to him. While Samuel's stomach twisted in a mix of pain and loss, another ally had been lost to the greed and racism that fueled Karen's reign of terror. Samuel's eyes darkened as he clutched the burner phone in his pocket, a silent promise that this was only a setback. Even as Captain Reynolds, a towering figure with graying hair and a stern salt and pepper beard, emerged from the cockpit after being summoned by Karen's call, Samuel's mind churned with plans for a monumental retribution that would shake Karen's world to its core. Despite his bloodied temple and burning flesh, the fire inside Samuel Turner grew brighter. His determination was unbroken, and he vowed that no matter how many allies were lost or how many wounds he sustained, the day would come when Karen Pierce would be forced to answer for every act of cruelty she had inflicted. Samuel Turner sat in seat 23B, his frail figure barely contained by the worn gray cushion as the atmosphere on the plane grew heavier by the minute. The tension was nearly tangible, mixing with the stale aroma of spilled coffee and antiseptic that clung to every surface. Across the aisle, Tom Hargrove sat with his laptop closed and his once crisp white shirt now creased by worry. His hazel eyes darted between Samuel and the unfolding chaos, filled with both anger and helplessness. 2 rows ahead, Sophia Morales cradled her sleeping toddler, her dark ponytail swaying gently as her tired face betrayed the burden of worry. Even the redhead seated beside Tom fidgeted with her empty granola wrapper, whispering under her breath as she replayed every moment of Karen Pierce's cruelty in her mind. The distress in the cabin had reached a fever pitch ever since Captain Reynolds had intervened after Karen's confrontation with Samuel. Earlier, Karen had accused Samuel of threatening a crew member and branded his actions as a federal offense on her plane. Samuel had looked up slowly, his sharp brown eyes meeting Reynolds' stern gaze while the blood crusted on his temple testified to the violence he had already endured. Despite the throbbing pain in his skull and searing burns on his arms and thighs, his voice remained steady and calm as he responded, "I did not threaten anyone. She shoved me during turbulence, that is all." But Karen, with a cold and rehearsed tone dripping with southern venom, insisted, "You grabbed a seat and disrupted safety." She claimed that when Samuel told her to sit, he threatened her, adding that he had made her feel threatened. Her words were a calculated lie, designed to wrap his every movement in guilt and frame him as a troublemaker on her plane. Passengers murmured among themselves, their voices a low ripple of disbelief. Tom Hargrove immediately shook his head and leaned forward, his voice gruff and firm as he declared, "That is not what happened. She pushed him. He was simply steadying himself." Sophia, with her maternal instinct and quiet conviction, nodded as if to silently testify, "He is no criminal. She is lying." Even the redhead, though trembling with anxiety, managed to say in a clear but shaky tone, "I saw it clearly. He did not threaten her at all." Jamal Carter, sitting 2 rows ahead, clenched his fists and added his own seething remark, "She is covering for herself after stealing my phone." His voice, though low, carried a fire that spoke volumes of the injustice they all felt. Before any further protest could arise, Captain Reynolds silenced the cabin with a sharp command, "Enough! I will handle this." He then turned his attention back to Samuel, ordering, "Stand up." With considerable effort and a struggle that caused his body to creak in protest, Samuel rose, gripping his battered wooden cane tightly in his left hand. As he obeyed, Captain Reynolds nodded toward Karen, who had stepped forward with a smug glint in her eyes. The captain's tone was flat as he said, "Search him." Karen's hands moved swiftly and with calculated roughness as she patted down Samuel's jacket and pants. The familiar burns still throbbed painfully beneath her touch, and every brush against his skin ignited fresh sparks of indignation. While rummaging through his pockets, she discovered the crumpled napkin with Jamal's number and the hidden burner phone, dismissing them as irrelevant evidence. However, with a sleight of hand practiced to near perfection, she surreptitiously slipped a folded note into his satchel, then produced it with a triumphant sneer. "What is this?" she demanded, unfolding the note for Captain Reynolds to examine. The hastily scrawled words read, "I'll make you pay." The handwriting was not his, and the note was meant to serve as damning evidence against him. Reynolds snatched the paper, his frown deepening as he compared the note to Samuel's calm protestation of innocence. "Is this yours?" he demanded. Samuel's sharp eyes widened in shock as he replied in a steady, gravelly voice, "No, I did not write that. She planted it." Karen crossed her arms and, in a tone of mock outrage, insisted, "He has been trouble ever since he boarded this flight." Captain Reynolds studied both the note and Samuel, his gray eyes narrowing in thought. After a long pause, he said, "This does not look good for you. We will sort this out when we land. You are now under watch until then. One wrong move and you will be in cuffs. I will keep an eye." Turning his attention to Karen, he commanded her to watch over Samuel until they reached the ground. Samuel sank back into his seat as the weight of the captain's warning pressed on him. His heart pounded against his frail chest, and the marks on his body, from the burns and the blood-crusted temple to the lingering bruises, became cruel symbols of the lie now hanging over his head. The cabin buzzed with whispered outrage and sympathetic murmurs. Tom Hargrove muttered curses under his breath while Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The redhead glared at Karen with open disgust, and Jamal's fists trembled with fury as he hissed that she had set Samuel up. It was clear to everyone that Karen had not only physically assaulted Samuel, but had also orchestrated this elaborate frame, twisting his actions into a crime he never committed. Karen's stance at the end of the aisle was that of a predator, her posture relaxed but her eyes burning with a cold, victorious satisfaction. She believed that by planting the note and fabricating a narrative that painted Samuel as a danger, she had successfully silenced any opposition and buried him beneath layers of lies and prejudice. But Samuel's mind, though fogged by pain, was racing with a plan. His fingers brushed the hidden burner phone in his jacket pocket, a device that, despite its dark, unlit screen, held the promise of vindication and retaliation. Samuel knew that he had built Horizon Airlines from nothing, fought through countless adversities, and refused to be broken by a single crooked flight attendant. The thought of the stolen video footage, now lost forever thanks to Karen's collusion with her accomplice Mike Tanner, stung like a fresh wound. Yet, even in this moment of betrayal and humiliation, Samuel's spirits surged with a fierce resolve. Outside, the Boeing 737 soared through the inky night as it crossed the jagged silhouette of the California border. The sprawling lights of Los Angeles beckoned like a distant promise of freedom and justice, even though inside the cabin, the air was thick with unspoken grievances. Samuel remained in his seat, his frail body pressed against the cushion as he silently calculated his next move. His sharp brown eyes, dulled by physical pain yet fierce with inner fire, remained fixed on the seat back ahead, where his thoughts churned like a storm. Every whispered conversation from his fellow passengers, every display of solidarity, from the petition that had already been gathered by Tom, Sophia, Jamal, and even a burly man in a Cowboys jersey, was a reminder that he was not alone in his fight. In a matter of minutes, 50 signatures had been collected on a hastily written petition demanding an investigation into Karen Pierce's actions for physical assault, false accusation, and misconduct. That document, clutched tightly in Sophia's trembling hand before being presented to Captain Reynolds, represented not just support for Samuel, but a collective outcry against racism and abuse of power. As Captain Reynolds emerged once more from the cockpit with a solemn expression, he read the petition with growing fury. His salt and pepper beard bristled as he looked around at the gathered passengers. Their voices, united in dissent, filled the cabin with a palpable energy of resistance that Karen had not anticipated. "This is unacceptable," Captain Reynolds declared, his authoritative tone cutting through the ambient hum of the plane. "We will investigate every claim made against flight attendant Karen Pierce." For a brief moment, it seemed as though justice might prevail, but Karen, ever defiant, stood near the galley with her navy blazer immaculate and her blonde bun a symbol of her unyielding arrogance. Her sharp blue eyes flashed with fury as she glared at the mounting evidence of her wrongdoing. Samuel Turner listened to the exchange in silence, his heart beating fast as he absorbed every word. The pain from his burns, the stinging sensation on his temple, and the humiliating weight of the planted note all converged to form a singular thought in his mind. Karen Pierce would pay dearly for what she had done. His resolve hardened into a plan so audacious and meticulously crafted that it promised a reckoning that none would see coming. Despite being cornered by a legal nightmare woven from lies and racial prejudice, Samuel was determined to reclaim his honor. He knew that once the plane landed, he would mobilize every resource at his disposal, every ally in the small community of passengers who had witnessed his torment. His eyes shone with a defiant light as he silently vowed that his retribution would be as overwhelming and as spectacular as the injustice he had suffered. In that fraught moment, as the engines droned steadily and the cabin lights cast long, uncertain shadows over the shaken faces of his fellow passengers, Samuel Turner held onto the secret weapon hidden in his jacket pocket. His battered body, marked by violence and degradation, was far from broken. Instead, it stood as a testament to a lifetime of resilience, and as the Boeing 737 continued its flight through the inky darkness, Samuel's mind churned with plans of turning the tables on Karen Pierce, plans that would eventually expose her cruelty to the world in such a way that every act of discrimination and abuse of power would be laid bare for all to see. The seeds of his ultimate retribution were sown on that flight, and though the immediate future was uncertain, one thing was clear: justice was coming, and it would be a reckoning that nobody would ever forget. Samuel Turner sat in seat 23B, his frail body slumped against the worn gray cushion, while the cabin's atmosphere grew ever more charged with anxiety and indignation. The events had escalated quickly that night, and every passenger on the Boeing 737 could feel that something critical was unfolding. Just moments before, Captain Reynolds had warned Samuel that his behavior, which Karen Pierce had so deliberately twisted to make him appear dangerous, would not be tolerated. Reynolds had accused him of threatening a crew member, a charge that Samuel calmly and firmly denied. "I did not threaten anyone," he had said, his gravelly voice steady despite the pain radiating from his burns and the blood-crusted cut above his temple. "She shoved me during turbulence, that is all," Karen had countered with rehearsed venomous remarks, insisting that he had disrupted safety and even threatened her personally, her southern drawl thick with malice. The murmurs among the passengers swelled into an uproar of disbelief and outrage. Tom Hargrove, his once crisp white shirt now creased with worry, had leaned forward and declared that what had occurred was not at all Samuel's fault, but rather a result of Karen's aggressive behavior. Sophia Morales, who had been quietly rocking her toddler, had nodded vigorously, her tired eyes glistening with a mix of fear and righteous anger. Even the redhead with freckled cheeks had whispered that she had seen the truth with her own eyes. Jamal Carter, sitting a couple of rows ahead, clenched his fists as his own experience of being wronged by Karen flashed uncomfortably in his mind. After all, she had stolen his phone and then destroyed its evidence with cold precision. All this had led to a dramatic moment when Captain Reynolds had ordered Samuel to stand up so he could be searched. Samuel's weakened body protested as he slowly rose, gripping his battered wooden cane with his left hand. Karen's hands had moved swiftly over him, patting down his jacket and trousers with a roughness that made him wince, as if to compound his already inflicted injuries. In her search, she had rifled through his pockets and then, almost as an afterthought, planted a folded note in his satchel. The note read, "I'll make you pay," a message deliberately crafted in a handwriting that was not his own. Captain Reynolds had snatched the note away, his eyes darkening with disapproval as he questioned Samuel, "Is this yours?" Samuel's own reply was measured and firm, "No, I did not write that. She planted it." But Karen, with arms crossed and a tone dripping with false indignation, insisted that Samuel had been trouble ever since he boarded. Captain Reynolds, whose presence had commanded respect through the entire ordeal, eventually declared that the matter would be sorted out once the plane landed. "We will look into this on the ground," he announced with finality. With that, he turned his attention back to the cockpit, leaving Samuel under Karen's watch. A decision that sent a wave of anxiety through the cabin. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he sank back into his seat, the weight of the planted lie a crushing blow to his already wounded dignity. Every mark on his body, the burns from the hot coffee, the bruises from that violent shove, and the blood that still oozed from his temple, was a testimony to Karen Pierce's cruelty. And now they bore the additional burden of a false accusation that could cost him dearly. As the tension slowly subsided into a fragile calm, murmurs of defiance began to ripple through the cabin. Tom Hargrove clapped Samuel's shoulder softly in a gesture of solidarity, while Sophia offered him a small, encouraging smile. The redhead whispered with a glimmer of hope, "We got her." And for a fleeting moment, it seemed like the tide might be turning. Samuel dared to let himself believe that justice was finally within reach, that maybe the noose of injustice around his neck was beginning to loosen. His sharp brown eyes, though clouded by pain, glinted with a spark of renewed determination. Yet, Karen Pierce was not ready to relinquish her grip on power. With a sudden shift in her demeanor, Karen slipped into the galley with her smug face giving way to a snarl of anger. There, she grabbed a teapot and, under the guise of offering comfort, expertly slipped a sedative into the tea. Her movements were quick, precise, and shrouded in malice. Returning to Samuel's row with that sickly sweet smile, she addressed him, "Tea, sir?" To calm your nerves? Exhausted yet ever polite, Samuel managed a nod and accepted the cup, though his cautious eyes betrayed his inner wariness. He took a sip, and for an instant, the bitter liquid offered him a modicum of warmth against the cold sting of his injuries. But the taste of comfort soon turned into a harbinger of betrayal. Karen leaned close, her crimson lips curving into a venomous whisper as she murmured, "You'll sleep through your little victory," before turning away with a stride that exuded triumph. Moments later, Samuel's eyes began to flutter as the sedative took hold, his head lolling to one side and his wooden cane clattering softly to the floor. He slumped into a state of eerie unconsciousness, and the previously electric energy in the cabin dimmed, as if a tragic silence had descended. The pleasant murmur of chatter was replaced by panicked calls for help. "He's dying!" Sophia's cry rang out raw with fear as she pushed her toddler aside and scrambled towards Samuel. Tom shot up from his seat in alarm, his hazel eyes widening as he hurried to check on him. The redhead fumbled for her call button while Jamal stormed toward Karen, his fists clenching so tightly it was as if he could physically strangle the injustice out of her. Even a burly man in a Cowboys jersey joined in, his booming voice declaring, "He's not breathing right." All around, passengers were united in their shock and outrage as they witnessed the unfolding nightmare. Within minutes, the intercom crackled to life with Captain Reynolds' calm yet firm command. "Flight attendants, report to 23 immediately. We are diverting to Phoenix for an emergency landing." The plane shuddered as it banked toward the sprawling desert city, its engines roaring in protest and the cabin trembling with the sudden shift in gravity. Karen's face paled for a moment as the gravity of her actions became undeniably clear. She moved hastily toward Samuel, but Tom intercepted her, his voice a steely command. "Stay back, you've done enough." Soon, two medics from the crew, a young woman with a buzz cut and a wiry man carrying a first aid kit, rushed down the aisle. Their navy vests emblazoned with the Horizon Airlines logo lent them an air of authority as they knelt beside Samuel's motionless form in 23B. The medic with the stethoscope checked his pulse and declared, "Pulse is weak, respiration's dropping," while her partner swiftly attached an oxygen mask to Samuel's face. In the chaos, the collective heartbeat of the cabin raced as everyone held their breath, praying that this battered man who had endured so much would find a way to pull through. It was a grueling descent as the Boeing 737 prepared for an emergency landing at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. The cabin lights remained dim, echoing the somber mood as the medics worked tirelessly to stabilize Samuel, whose burns and bruises told a story of endless struggle. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the slow rhythm of Samuel's breathing began to steady. His eyes fluttered open, though they were glassy from the shock, and a weak cough escaped his lips as the stimulant started to work its magic. A wave of relief washed over the concerned faces of those around him. Tom exhaled deeply, Sophia's eyes filled with tears of cautious hope, and even the redhead let out a quiet sigh of relief. Yet, amidst the relief, a current of unyielding defiance still pulsed inside Samuel Turner. Even as he fought against the haze of drugs and pain, his mind was already plotting his next move. He could not allow the heinous betrayal of Karen Pierce, who had not only physically assaulted him, but had schemed to frame him for her own malicious purposes, to go unpunished. In a low, determined whisper, he managed to murmur to Sophia, "She did this," his voice heavy with both sorrow and vengeance. Sophia's gaze hardened as she met his, and in that silent exchange it was clear that the fight for justice was far from over. As the Boeing 7037 neared the ground, passengers began to rally around Samuel. A petition that had been hastily compiled earlier, a chorus of 50 voices demanding an investigation into Karen Pierce's brutal misconduct, rested as a symbol of their collective dissent. Tom, Sophia, Jamal, and others had signed it with trembling yet resolute hands, each signature a testament to the injustice Samuel had suffered. Now, as Captain Reynolds prepared for emergency landing, those voices of defiance, hope, and solidarity vowed that Karen Pierce would soon answer for every ounce of cruelty and racism she had inflicted. In that moment, with the plane descending through the inky night toward the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles, Samuel Turner's resolve burned brighter than any pain he had endured. Though his body was battered and his pride wounded by lies, he knew that his journey was far from over. Justice, he believed, would ultimately prevail, not only for him, but for every soul that had ever been downtrodden by cruelty and discrimination. And as the medics continued their desperate work and the flight attendants prepared for the emergency landing, one thing was clear. Karen Pierce's reign of terror, built on racism and malice, was about to face a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of injustice. Within the crowded terminal, a new figure burst onto the scene. Grace Thompson, a fierce black lawyer in her 40s dressed in a deep crimson suit with short curls framing her determined face, strode purposefully toward a holding cell where Samuel was confined. Clutching a thick folder filled with Horizon Airlines ownership papers bearing Samuel Turner's name, she commanded, "Release him," her voice low and steely as she confronted Dale Pierce. As passengers gathered around, their voices blending into a chorus of righteous anger, Grace laid bare the irrefutable proof that Samuel Turner was not a menace but the owner of Horizon Airlines. Karen's dark plot had been exposed as she stumbled from the jet bridge, her pristine navy blazer no longer able to mask the pallor of her fear. The revelation was like a thunderclap. Tom's wide eyes, Sophia's hopeful expression, and Jamal's recording reignited the fight for justice as every passenger demanded accountability. Samuel, his bruised body slumped in the cold cell, managed a faint smile, his sharp brown eyes alive with steely resolve despite the pain and humiliation. In that charged moment, it was clear that Karen Pierce's reign of cruelty had reached its breaking point, and a tremendous reckoning was at hand. One that promised to overturn every injustice Samuel Turner had suffered and silence every hateful whisper of discrimination. Aaron, who had earlier maintained her cruel control with an icy demeanor and sharp blue eyes, now watched in panic as her wicked plan unraveled before everyone's eyes. Her once commanding smirk had vanished, replaced by a visage of dread. Clutching her phone as though it were the last vestige of her power, she dialed her union representative with trembling fingers. "I need backup now," she whispered into the receiver, her voice thick with desperation. Her plea was not for justice, but for protection. Protection from a mob of outraged passengers who now had the strength of numbers and truth on their side. She had nearly killed Samuel Turner, a man who had endured a lifetime of prejudice to build an empire, and now everyone was aware of her monstrous behavior. As Samuel's stretcher was rolled slowly along the jet bridge, the terminal erupted with chaos. Passengers, galvanized by the injustice they had witnessed, began to chant and shout. "She's done and justice is coming," cried one, while another bellowed, "Horizon Airlines belongs to Samuel Turner." Their voices filled the cavernous space, creating an atmosphere thick with insurgent hope. It was then that a new figure stormed into the scene. A formidable and dignified lawyer named Grace Thompson. Dressed in a deep crimson suit that contrasted sharply with the sterile surroundings, Grace's short curls framed a face etched with determination. With a heavy folder clutched tightly under one arm, she strode purposefully toward a locked holding cell where Samuel had been confined by Karen's accomplice, Dale Pierce, a hulking cop in his late 30s, known for his sunburned sneer and brute behavior. Grace's entrance was like a bolt of lightning splitting through the turbulent skies of injustice. With a voice as sharp as a steel blade, she slammed the Horizon Airlines ownership papers onto the table, her tone leaving no room for denial. "Samuel Turner is the rightful owner of Horizon Airlines," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "Your sister assaulted him, framed him, and nearly killed him. She's finished." The papers, with Samuel's name emblazoned at the top, served as irrefutable evidence that not only vindicated him but also exposed the depth of Karen Pierce's treachery. As Grace's words resonated through the terminal, Dale's squad froze, their heavy boots shuffling uncertainly over the polished floor. The passengers, now emboldened by the truth, surged forward with shouts of, "She's done, and justice is here!" A Horizon Airlines board member named Harold Vance soon appeared on the scene, his bald head gleaming beneath the terminal lights and his sleek gray suit exuding authority. With 2 colleagues at his side, his arrival marked the beginning of the end for Karen Pierce. His voice was clipped and decisive as he faced her directly. "Karen Pierce, you are fired, effective immediately," he pronounced, his tone carrying the weight of a guillotine drop on her world. "Your actions are a disgrace to this company, and you will be held accountable for every ounce of cruelty you have inflicted." Karen's sharp blue eyes widened in disbelief, her crimson lips parting in a scream that faded into a futile protest. "He's lying," she shrieked, lunging weakly toward Samuel as if to reclaim some small measure of power. But Dale Pierce intercepted her desperate advance, forcefully restraining her with a now subdued glare. Despite her protests, the evidence had turned the tide irrevocably in Samuel Turner's favor. Passengers cheered, their unified voices like a tidal wave of justice crashing against the oppressive lies of the past. Tom Hargrove and Sophia Morales exchanged looks of relief and vindication as Jamal Carter resumed filming with steadfast resolve, determined to capture every moment of Karen's downfall. Yet Karen was not yet finished with her devious machinations. In a final, desperate bid to salvage her shattered facade, she pulled out her own phone and attempted to upload a doctored video, a vile montage designed to depict Samuel as a menacing figure, his frail form twisted in anger, while amplifying her own cries of abuse in a warped, disingenuous symphony. But the moment her manipulated video hit the networks, it ignited a ferocious backlash. The stream spread rapidly across social media, catalyzing a white supremacist mob already simmering on the outskirts of the airport. Nearly 50 men, their faded caps and patched jackets clutched in grim determination, surged onto the tarmac with pipes, chains, and hateful chants. Their derisive slurs and roars of "Get the bastard" reverberated through the night as they smashed windows and dented the plane's metal body. One man torched a fuel cart, its flames licking the dark sky, while another's chain swung viciously at the aircraft. The mob's savage attack was a horrifying culmination of racial hatred stoked by Karen's twisted narrative. Caught in the midst of the chaos, Samuel stumbled and was roughly hauled by Dale's squad towards a holding cell within the terminal. The medics' efforts to safeguard him were overwhelmed by the brutality of the moment, and as he was forcibly cuffed, fresh blood trickled from his temple. Inside the cramped, cold cell, a stark, concrete box with a solitary metal bench, Samuel sat slumped, every physical wound a bitter testament to the injustice he had suffered. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes, though tired and filled with the scars of battle, burned with an unquenchable resolve. He had survived this onslaught, and though his legacy now hung by a thread, his spirit remained indomitable. Amid the pandemonium, Grace Thompson's commanding presence rallied the remaining voices of reason and integrity. With a look that combined both compassion and steely determination, she confronted Dale Pierce once more, her voice rising over the din. "Unlock that cell right now." Her folder of incontrovertible evidence lay open on a nearby table, its pages a damning record of every atrocity committed by Karen Pierce. "Your sister's actions are beyond redemption," Grace declared, her words slicing through the chaos. "Samuel Turner has built this airline from the dust, and now it is time for you to face justice for your sister's cruelty." The passengers, now united in their defiant stand against hatred, roared their support. Even as Karen's final, desperate video attempt flickered on screens and was quickly debunked by the raw, unedited footage from the plane's security cameras, the truth could not be hidden. Inside a nearby security van, which now carried Samuel Turner away to a safe house, his spirit burned with quiet triumph, despite the ravages of brutal abuse and the searing betrayal by those meant to protect him. Samuel's voice, steady, gravelly, and unyielding, echoed in the digital ether as he declared to the world, "I am Samuel Turner, owner of Horizon Airlines. I have endured racism and cruelty, and this is the truth." As his words broadcast live, millions of viewers witnessed Karen Pierce's downfall in a tidal wave of justice that spanned the nation. The safety of that humble van, speeding along the dark streets away from the shattered remnants of the mob and the burning wreckage of his plane, symbolized not only an escape from immediate peril, but the birth of a new battle for redemption. Grace Thompson sat beside him, her crimson suit a vivid counterpoint to the gloom outside, her eyes fierce with the promise of retribution. "We will fight this every step of the way," she vowed in a hushed, resolute tone. Samuel, though battered, smiled faintly, his sharp brown eyes reflecting the flickering lights of hope and defiance. "She thinks it's over," he whispered, his gravelly voice imbued with steel. "But her cruelty will be consumed by justice." And so, as the van disappeared into the night, carrying Samuel Turner and the legacy he had built over decades, one thing was abundantly clear to every witness and every heart that had joined in his struggle. Karen Pierce's reign of racist terror was at an end, and a new era of accountability and truth had just begun. Samuel Turner's harrowing journey aboard Horizon Airlines culminated in a moment that would alter his legacy and shatter the veneer of racial injustice that had plagued him for decades. As the Boeing 737 touched down in Phoenix with a jolt that rattled every passenger, the chaos that had built up throughout the flight exploded into a cacophony of shouts, protests, and raw emotion. Medics hurried to lift his battered, frail body onto a stretcher, while his blood-crusted temple and scalded arms bore silent testimony to the vicious physical and emotional abuses he had endured. His faded brown jacket, stained with coffee and blood, clung to him like a second skin, and the marks left by Karen Pierce, a flight attendant whose cruelty had been both calculated and ruthless, were emblazoned on his skin for all to see. In the terminal, the raw pulse of outrage was unmistakable. Passengers gathered with faces etched in disbelief and righteous anger. Tom Hargrove, whose once crisp white shirt now hung in disarray, stood tall with his hazel eyes ablaze as he watched Samuel being carted away. Sophia Morales, gripping her toddler tight, radiated both maternal care and steely resolve as she joined others calling for justice. The red-hailed passenger, her freckles vivid against her pale cheeks, whispered, "I can't believe this is happening," while Jamal Carter's trembling fists and resolute gaze revealed the burning passion of someone who had risked his own safety to document every assault committed by Karen Pierce. In the ensuing melee, Dale Pierce's squad tried in vain to control the situation. Passengers' collective voice and the onslaught of truth overwhelmed the mob's vicious advance. Amidst the chaos, Karen's smug facade finally shattered. Her pristine navy blazer and perfectly coiled blonde bun stood in stark contrast to the pandemonium as she was eventually restrained by security officers. Her fate was sealed when multiple officers, swayed by the undeniable evidence and the public outcry, placed her under arrest for attempted murder, assault, and falsifying evidence. Her downfall was broadcast live, her mugshot a stark and bitter reminder of how unchecked prejudice and cruelty ultimately lead to ruin. While the chaos raged in the terminal, a security van whisked Samuel Turner away to a safe house, a modest brick building tucked behind scraggly palms on a quiet street. Inside the van, as the tires hummed against the asphalt and the neon lights of the city blurred past, Samuel leaned against the vinyl seat. His body was weakened by the brutality he had endured, his right arm aching with the fading marks of Karen's grip, his thighs and forearms still blistered, yet his spirit burned brighter than ever. Grace Thompson sat beside him, her crimson suit a vivid beacon of hope. She squeezed his hand firmly and murmured, "We will fight this, every step of the way." Samuel, with his sharp brown eyes reflecting both pain and unyielding resolve, replied in a gravelly whisper, "She thinks it's over, but her cruelty will be consumed by justice." In the safe house, amidst the dim glow of a single lamp and the quiet hum of an old laptop, Grace inserted a USB drive. The screen flickered to life, flooding with unedited security footage that indisputably recorded Karen Pierce's every act of brutality and deceit. The raw, uncompromised images showed Karen dragging Samuel down the jet bridge, denying his meal with a sneer, spilling scalding coffee on his legs, and, worst of all, tampering with his tea to force him into a sedated sleep. As the footage streamed live to a captivated audience across the nation, Samuel's voice, steady and resolute despite the pain, declared, "I am Samuel Turner, owner of Horizon Airlines. I have endured racism and cruelty, and this is the truth." Millions watched as the unvarnished truth dismantled Karen's twisted narrative. The public's outrage surged like a tidal wave, overwhelming those who had once defended her. Police swarmed the airport. Her mob of extremist supporters was dispersed, and the fires that had briefly consumed the aircraft were doused by determined firefighters. Samuel's legacy, though scarred, now shone with the light of accountability and reform. Horizon Airlines would be reborn, not in the ashes of hate, but through the righteous fire of justice. Standing in the safe house, Samuel's frail yet resilient figure was a testament to the power of endurance. His journey had been long and brutally unforgiving, marked by physical assault, deep-seated racial injustice, and a relentless campaign of humiliation. Yet, in that final moment of reckoning, he transformed his suffering into a weapon. With the help of allies like Grace Thompson, Tom Hargrove, Sophia Morales, Jamal Carter, and countless others who had stood by him, Samuel Turner not only reclaimed his name, but also redefined his destiny. "Take it," he said softly to Grace, his voice trembling with both exhaustion and determination. "Horizon's yours now. Root out the rot and rebuild what I started." Grace, her eyes wide with a fierce promise, nodded. "I'll make it right." That declaration echoed far beyond the confines of the safe house, resonating with every person who had ever felt oppressed or silenced. Samuel's final act was not one of vengeance for its own sake. It was a call to reform, an invitation for the world to stand up against injustice in every form. As the safe house door closed behind them and the van sped through the dark streets of Phoenix, Samuel Turner's story became a beacon of hope. His journey, marred by scars both visible and hidden, taught us that true power is not in retaliation alone, but in the unwavering commitment to building something better from the ashes. Karen Pierce's reign of terror, fueled by racism and cruelty, was over, and in its place, a new era of accountability, reform, and unity was just beginning.